In this video, I want to talk about what I call the 5% rule of bass fishing. And this is going to be a pretty low-key video, especially in comparison to most of my videos that I spend a lot of time editing. This is going to be probably even a one-shot wonder here. I'm actually in my boat right now rigging up some rods for a tournament tonight, but whether you fish tournaments or not, the 5% rule I think can just really help you to go out and just be more productive out there on the water, to catch more bass. And I want to explain it and give you some examples of where it has really helped me out there on the water. So like I said, low key, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, when I say 5%, what I'm really referring to is that most of the tips and tricks and little things that you hear about different lures and techniques out there, I think even from my channel, I think most of the time these tips might only help you by 5%. They may help you to only be about 5% more productive. Some are going to help you, I know a couple of things that I've even said on this channel that probably would help you by 50%. But for the most part, they may just be 5% tips. But if you think about it, and you think about the mathematics of that, not that you want to think about it, if you do 5% things each day, that can help you to be 100% more productive. So instead of going out on the water and catching 5 bass, you might catch 10. You are 100% better, or maybe from 10 bass to 20 bass. And the more fish that you catch, a lot of times the better opportunities you're gonna have at some bigger fish. So what I want to go over in this video is really just a few of those 5% tips that actually may be more than 5%, but that's something that I pay such close attention to every time I go out there on the water because I really believe it will help me. Now, the first 5% tip that I want to give you is always rig up some what if baits. A number of years ago, I was fishing in a Bassmaster Open event on Lake Toho down in Florida. And during the practice of this tournament, I actually ended up catching several bass on a topwater frog, like a horny toad style bait. And come tournament time, I was still catching a few fish doing it that way, but I really got kind of keyed in on catching fish, flipping and pitching. And I was flipping and pitching pads, and I was catching fish doing that, and big ones. And because I was on a flipping and pitching bite, I kind of took the horny toad out of my mind. I also took it off the front deck of my boat and I put it inside of my rod locker. Now, the reason that I'm telling you this is on the second day of this tournament, I was very close-minded onto what I was doing. I was flipping, I was pitching pads like I was talking about. And I kind of came across this area that had a couple of hydrilla clumps out in the middle, kind of in between all of these pads. And this is an area, this is a situation where I would have picked up that horny toad like I did so much in practice and caught a fish there. But I thought that I was gonna get the bigger bites flipping and pitching the pads. Now, because I had put that bait away, I didn't even think to pick it up. But guess who did have a horny toad? My co-angler, right? And my co-angler threw that horny toad over those hydrilla clumps out in the middle of this like pad area, and he ended up catching a 5.5 pounder behind me that day. And I actually ended up finishing this tournament in 47th place, and in the Bassmaster Opens they pay the top 40. And if I had caught that one fish, if I had caught that fish, it's not a guarantee that I would have, but if I had caught that fish, I would have placed well in the 20s actually in this particular tournament and gotten a good size check. But it really has always made me realize that I need to have those what if baits on the front deck of my boat. And what I mean by that is those baits that what if I come across a certain situation on the water. Yeah, I was flipping and pitching, but I should have just kept the horny toad up there because what if I came across those hydrilla clumps, which I did. If I had picked that rod up, cast over there, more than likely I would have caught that bass and I would have had a really good tournament, right? I still beat 150 guys, but I would have cashed a check. And so that is what I have found to be really, really important in my bass fishing, because it might only help me to catch one more fish in a day as having a what if bait on the front deck, but that one fish might be a big one and the one that is really meaningful in the day. So ever since that happened, I've kind of realized that if you look at some of the best anglers in the world, the anglers like Brian Thrift and Jacob Wheeler, and I'm even gonna put Ben Milliken in this group of guys because he's really hot right now and he's fishing the opens. If you look at this group of anglers, one thing that they have in common, besides being very good with their electronics, is that they almost always, all the time, have about 30 rods on the front deck of their boat. And I really believe that the days of kind of that one rod Todd guy are not over, but they're almost over. Back in the day when we used to show up to a tournament or go fishing, if a guy was out there and he had 1 or 2 rods on the front deck of the boat, that was the guy that you were scared of. But nowadays, with what we have learned about bass, which the biggest thing that we've learned about bass that has really changed this is that bass are very much like humans. They have different personalities where they really react to different lures all very differently. I feel like back in the day, we kind of used to think, hey, the bass, we would kind of group them together. The bass are hitting a chatterbait today. And there are definitely days out there where more bass are hitting one lure, but very single specific fish have different things that they are going to react to. And so taking advantage of the area that you're fishing and using a lot of different lures, you're going to get bites from bass that aren't always responding to the exact same lure that you want. And that's why I think you see these guys really excel in a lot of these tournaments, is because they have so many rods on the front deck of their boat. And when they get to an area, they test out 3, 4, 5, 6 different lures. And sometimes they're gonna find that, hey, the bass really are liking this bait, or that bass, that one specific bass really liked this bait, whether it's a big swim bait or a big worm or a shaky head. So having what if baits and getting away from just having a couple of rods on your front deck of your boat, I think that that's more than a 5% tip. I think that that's something that can really help you to just go out there and catch a lot more bass. Try to fish as many different situations out there on the water and use a lot of different lures. Now, before we get any further into the video, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, FinFishing.com. I've got hats, I've got shirts, I've got gloves. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of the purchases that I have got. It really helps support the channel, helps me to bring you kind of the best content that I know how. So if you guys want to help support the channel, click that link down below for finfishing.com. Thank you so much. Now, the other 5% tip, and this is honestly, this is another tip it's more than 5% in my mind. And not only do you want to have a lot of lures, but you want to make sure that these things are ready to go, that your baits, that your lures are ready to go. And what I mean by that specifically are your hooks. A number of years ago, I was fishing another Bassmaster Open. This was at Lake Erie this time. And this was actually the first year that I fished the Bassmaster Opens. And in this tournament, I was catching fish on a drop shot like everyone does at Lake Erie, smallmouth. And I had ran in earlier in the day because I had a decent bag. And I had one fish though that was small. I had like 4 4-pounders and then like a 2 1/4, 2.5. But the wind had started to pick up. I wanted to make sure that I got in, and I actually ended up spending about an hour inside the bay there at Sandusky where we took off in this tournament. And so I was just fishing a bunch of stuff that I had no clue. You know, I had never been in there. I'd never really been fishing in there. And so I was just fishing the things that I saw. And there's a bunch of riprap bank in this particular bay. And I actually picked up, I had a square bill crankbait that was rigged up from like 2 weeks prior to this tournament that was in my rod locker. I pulled that out, and within a few casts of pulling this crankbait out, I hook into like a 4 to 4.5 pound smallmouth that comes leaping out of the air, and this is inside the bay, comes leaping outside of the air and comes off. And I remember how heartbreaking it was at the time, because again, in this tournament, guess what I finished? I finished 44th, and they pay the top 40. I catch that one fish, I make a check, okay? And the reason that fish came off was not because of the wrong rod or the wrong line. It was because the square bill that I was using, to be honest, it had dull hooks on it. Not only dull hooks, but these hooks were a little bit rusty, right? I had been using this square bill just around, my local area just for fun, not in a tournament situation. And I just picked it up and I thought in my mind, well, I'm probably not gonna catch anything in here anyways. So I didn't sit down to spend the time to put new hooks on this bait. I just started winging it out there, and lo and behold, I hook into this big fish and it comes off. And that was 100% my fault. And I remember this fish very vividly to this day. But again, any lure that you have on the front deck of your boat, any rod that you have, and this is no matter if you are tournament fishing or just out there fun fishing. Because if you're out there just fun fishing, we want to catch every single fish out there, right? And no matter what rod you have though, make sure that it's good to go. And one of the biggest things that you can do is make sure that it has good hooks on it. I replace the treble hooks on any treble hooked bait that I get. Top waters, lipless crankbaits, anything like that that has treble hooks on it, I always replace the hooks. I don't even use stock hooks. There are no stock hooks that I will use pretty much out there on the market. And there's a lot of good treble hooks these days. I've had a lot of good success with the KVD triple grips. I've had a lot of good success with the Berkeley Fusion 19s. Owner has, I forget the name of the Owner treble hook that I like, but there's a lot of good hooks out there on the market. So make sure that when you go out there, not only do you have a lot of baits, but that they're ready to go, because it might just make the difference with that one fish, right? 5% rule. It might only make a 5% difference, but that can make a huge difference out there in your day of fishing. Now, the next 5% tip that I want to talk to you about, and this is one that really applies again to anybody who is fishing, is that hook sets are free. Remember that, hook sets are free. There are days out there on the water where you're not always going to feel the fish the best, whether it be that you're fishing in cold water and the bass just really aren't hitting that lure well and you're not really feeling that thump, or maybe you're just fishing in really harsh conditions. A lot of times on windy days, because you're trying to manage the wind and your trolling motor, you don't always feel the fish the best. And there is no shame with just setting the hook when something feels off, because there have been countless times where I've been on the water and I didn't set the hook, or I set the hook too late after realizing a fish had been on my bait. I remember one time, this wasn't even a tournament situation, I was just out there fun fishing with a buddy, and I flip a plastic Texas rig into a tree, and it felt like a bluegill came up there and hit that bait. It was like, just your typical machine gun bluegill hit, right? And I didn't even set the hook, but he wasn't really letting go. So all I did was just kind of pop my rod up, and out swims a 6-pounder with my bait in its mouth. And I'm like, oh geez, I realized that it wasn't a bluegill, it was this big bass. And I'm getting that fish to the boat, and he pops off. He jumps one time and pops off because I just literally didn't even hardly set the hook. And so just remember that hook sets are free. There's no shame at all with setting the hook. And a lot of times, especially really big fish, a lot of times they're not always going to hit that bait and run off with it. I have seen multiple times, especially in Florida. There have been so many times where I'm in Florida and I'm flipping and pitching heavy cover, or I'm casting a big worm out on a hydrilla line, where I will pick up on my bait and there's just weight there. It's like they inhaled your bait on the way down and they're just sitting there with it. They're not moving, they're just sitting there with it. And I have missed some big fish in my life because I thought I was in the grass when I should have been setting the hook, right? Because hook sets are free. So that's another thing. It's a 5% tip. It may only help you out every now and then, but that fish could be a 9-pounder, a 10-pounder. For all we know. Now, the last 5% tip that I want to talk about all comes down to your fishing line. And this is a really important one. Another Bassmaster Open event I was fishing, and I remember a lot from my open experiences because you learn so much fishing those big events and just being out on the water for a number of days in a row. And this was a tournament where I actually did end up getting a check, so it didn't really cost me money in the tournament. Well, it probably did end up costing me a little bit money, but I had an okay first day. I was kind of sitting in the middle of the pack. And the second day of this tournament, one of the first things that I did is I went to the same area that I'd caught them, and immediately I'm flipping and pitching wood cover, and I flip into this tree. A little bass hits it, like a half-pound bass hits it. I set the hook, and my bait goes straight into a log. So I get up there and I just jab my rod into the log and get my bait unhung, just like we all do. And what do? I just pick my bait up, I fix my bait, and I just keep going. I didn't even look at the line, check the line. And this is, again, some of you guys know this, but it's just something that just slips our minds from time to time. But anyways, it wasn't but 5 minutes later, I come up to another really good tree, and I flip in there and I set the hook. I get bit, I set the hook, and this about 3.5, 4 pounder just flashes like this and breaks my line. Literally, I just set the hook, have it hooked for a second, whoosh, my line breaks, and I see this fish roll over. And that fish would have definitely helped me in that tournament. Like I said, it would have helped me to get a bigger check. I still end up getting a check in that tournament, but that could be a huge difference. That could be the difference between getting a check. That could be the difference between winning. That could be just the difference in you catching your personal best, is making sure that your line is good to go. Now, with that being said, I literally spent 3 weeks completing a test where I tested 29 different fluorocarbon lines and over 700 tests. And I'm gonna leave a link for that video right here, because in my mind, I found what I think is the best fluorocarbon in the world. So if you guys like this video, I think you'll enjoy this one. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy this laid back style, and I'll see you in the next one.